Helen Foster became a star at the end of the silent era and successfully transitioned to starring in the Talkies in 1929. But by the mid-1930s, she more or less retired before drifting into bit parts. Why? Join me as I investigate. Helen Foster was born in Independence, Kansas in 1906. I could find very little information about Helen's early life. We do know that she attended school in Kansas City before finishing school in Florida. Shortly after graduating, she arrived in Hollywood in 1924, and by 1925, debuted as the leading lady in her very first film, the 1925 Western On the Go, which was made at Action Pictures and also starred Jay Wisley. After playing the leading lady in two more westerns in 1925, Helen began to star in a series of tuxedo comedies, a series of comedy shorts produced by Educational Pictures, a few of which were directed by Roscoe Arbuckle. One of these shorts was The Surviving Cleaning Up, in which Helen played a wife who leaves for the day and instructs her bumbling husband, played by Johnny Arthur, to clean the home before she returns. Hilarity ensues. Another surviving short, Move Along, from 1926, saw Helen playing the leading lady to comedian Lloyd Hamilton. The pair portrayed a couple that are out on the street and attempt to find creative ways to make shelter. In 1927, it appears that Helen signed with FPO and began to star in feature-length pictures again. She played leading lady to George O'Hara in California or Bust, to Ranger the Dog in When a Dog Loves and The Outlaw Dog, and supported Viola Dana and Naughty Nanette. She then moved to Universal later in 1927, where she starred with Fred Humes in Hands Off and with Alice Joyce, Jean Hersholt, and George J. Lewis in The Surviving 13 Washington Square, in which she plays a young lady that has doubts that her fiancé's aristocratic family will accept her humble background. In 1928, Helen starred with Jack Daugherty in the serial Haunted Island, starred with Dorothy Davenport, Reed, and Noah Beery in Hellship Bronson, and starred in perhaps her most famous role of all, that of Sally Canfield in the classic exploitation topical film The Road to Ruin. Sally begins as a naive teenager, but she is soon led astray by friends into a world of sex, drugs, and alcohol with tragic results. Despite the film being made on a relatively very cheap budget, it apparently was a smash commercial hit, although I can't find concrete proof of that. Either way, it has enjoyed a lasting legacy of warning teenagers of what a life of debauchery can lead to. Later in 1928, Helen was top billed in two films at Ray Art, Sweet 16 and Should a Girl Marry? Helen starred in three more silents at Universal in 1929 before being selected by Dorothy Davenport to star as the title character in her film Linda, a silent with synchronized sound and sound effects. Linda is a country girl who is forced into a loveless marriage and eventually finds romance with Dr. Paul Randall, played by Warner Baxter. Helen next made her talkie debut as one of the many stars of Warner Brothers' 1929 comedy musical Gold Diggers of Broadway, which also starred Nancy Welford, Conway Turrell, Winnie Leitner, Ann Pennington, Lillian Tashman, and William Bakewell. The movie, which was entirely shot in two-color Technicolor, was a massive critical and commercial hit, becoming the third highest grossing film of the year. Helen, who played ingenue Violet Dane, won favorable reviews from Variety, who predicted she did well enough for the studio to promote her to starring in films similar to those made by Anita Page. Sadly, only a portion of this film remains. After supporting Charlotte Greenwood in So Long Letty, also in 1929, Helen finished out the year by starring in Painted Faces with Joe E. Brown. Brown, here in a rare dramatic role, played a clown that becomes a juror who fights to prove the innocence of an actor who is the defendant at the trial. Helen played Joe's love interest, Nancy. After such an encouraging start in the talkies, Helen surprisingly took the next year off from pictures. It appears that she was dropped by Warner Brothers or chose to leave the studio. I couldn't find which. I couldn't find any other information about what she did in 1930. From 1931 to 1934, she starred in several B movies at various Poverty Row studios. She was top billed in another exploitation film, 1931's Primrose Path, which also starred John Darrow, was leading lady to Western star Bill Cody in Ghost City in 1932, and then leading lady to Western star Hugh Gibson in Boiling Point, and Western star Bob Steele in Young Blood, both also in 1932. She had a small role in School for Girls in 1934, an exploitation film that also starred Sidney Fox and Lois Wilson, and finally reprised her leading role in Dorothy Davenport's sound remake of The Road to Ruin, also in 1934. The character this time was named Ann Dixon. Although she was 27, Helen was still chosen by Davenport to recreate her famous silent role as the doomed teenager. While critics at Variety did not find Helen's acting strong enough to really drive the film, I disagree. I think Helen's recreation of the character with dialogue this time made it even stronger and was one of her best performances. She perfectly captured the emotions and angst of a teenager grappling with such a fate. Again, following a relatively successful film, Helen vanished again. She did not resurface until the end of the decade and went on to star in a few bit roles over the next 2 decades, including parts in The Westerner, Call Northside 777, When My Baby Smiles at Me, and Never Wave at a WAC. I attempted to find Helen in all of these pictures. In The Westerner, she is credited as Janice, but I could not spot her. In Call Northside, she was credited as a secretary. I spotted the side profile of one secretary, but I could not make it out if it was Helen or not. And When My Baby Smiles at Me, she is credited as a waitress, but I never spotted a waitress in the one restaurant scene, just a cigarette girl that looked younger than Helen would have been in 1948. Finally, I watched Never Wave at a WAC twice and thought I spotted her as a character named Captain Finch, but I couldn't definitely tell if it was her because I wasn't sure if her hair was blonde or brunette at this time. If you have seen Helen Foster in any of these films, please comment and let me know so I can rewatch them. Following an extra appearance in 1956's Around the World in 80 Days, Helen retired from the film industry for good at the age of 50. I couldn't find any information about her life post-Hollywood or anything about a possible husband or children or family. We do know that Helen Foster passed away in 1982 at the age of 76. So we are left with the question, why did Helen Foster's Talkie career lose momentum after such an encouraging start? All I can think of is that Helen got lost among the large group of young ingenues at Warner Brothers that had successfully transitioned to the Talkies and proved herself starring in a musical. Probably feeling frustrated about not being given more of a chance or opportunity there, she took a year off, before returning to star in a series of B pictures and eventually moving on to bit parts and character work. It's a shame, as just as the Variety reviewer stated in their review of Gold Diggers, I think that Helen was a delightful ingenue, proving herself equally adept at both comedy and drama and eventually musical comedy. She also was not afraid to tackle grittier material, like both versions of Road to Ruin. Despite being exploitation films, both versions proved to be cautionary tales that allowed Helen to really showcase her range as an actor. We are fortunate to have some of Helen's silent and talkie work available to watch on YouTube. Check out Cleaning Up, Move Along, 13 Washington Square, and Road to Ruin from her silent days. You can also find most of her talkie westerns and the talkie version of Road to Ruin. Helen Foster was a true natural that deserved a more successful career. If you have any information about her, please let me know. I must thank my sources for this episode: IMDb, Buck Rainey's book, Serial Film Stars, and archive.org for their digitization of photoplay and Variety. Please like and subscribe or follow this account if you want to learn more about the history of silent film stars whose stardom lasted only briefly in the talkies. Up next, join me as I cover the silent talkie career of Robert Fraser. Thank you so much for joining me. Enjoy the rest of your day.